Hello. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello everyone. It's great to see you. We are about to have a great conversation. I've been very interested in legal education now for a long time. I've had a strong opinion about lawyers graduating from law school and not knowing what to do on a day one when they were not going to in-house as frequently. And now we have seen in the recent years a trend of junior lawyers actually straight out of law school going in-house and making a difference. And so my opinion about law schools preparing for day one is there, and I've been exploring it. That's why I've been teaching at Berkeley Law, lecturing at various law schools, and very interested in this field of legal education that now has surfaced because of generative AI. And so today I have a pleasure to talk to someone who I've known for a long time. I've collaborated with her many, many times, including on my recent book for Product Counsel. And without further ado, Linsey, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I'm really excited about this conversation. For folks who haven't met you, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Olga, for having me. This is so fun. And I'll introduce my dogs as well. That's Honey, and there's another one, Boomer, who's running around here. But so if you hear them, that's who they are. I am Linsey Krolik. I am currently in my academic career, which is kind of new for me. I'm a professor at Santa Clara University School of Law, and I teach experiential classes and clinics. I run the Tech Edge JD program, which is all about lawyers, exactly like who you just described, Olga, who are interested in tech law and want to hit the ground running with skills that they have honed during their law school career and can really put out there and start adding value immediately. I teach a law school clinic called the Entrepreneurs Law Clinic, which is a clinic for real startups. Students do real legal work for startups, not just entity formation, but things like writing agreements, terms of service, privacy policies, et cetera, et cetera. And then I teach privacy law. I'm a privacy nerd and an AI nerd, which is part of what we're here to talk about today. And then lastly, I teach another class called Law and Technology of Silicon Valley, which is all about what it's like to be an in-house lawyer. And I was previously in-house for many years at companies like PayPal, Bill, Arm, Palm, and others.
I love it. I love that you started your introduction with the introduction of your dogs. I wish my cats were available and posing. Like on my left is Duchess, on my right is Sage, who I call Jason. But alas, they're cats. So they have a mind of their own. So they're not available for introduction. But they definitely added to yours. I love the scenic route you took and all the things you're doing in Santa Clara, preparing students to be impactful on day one. You briefly mentioned your other life in-house at, small companies like PayPal and a few others. Tell us more. How did you get there? What was your career in-house? What was your focus? Did you go in-house straight out of law school? What did you like and what inspired you to do things in the academic world today?
Yeah, I actually did go straight in-house after law school, not to PayPal, but I got a JD MBA, and which if the Tech Edge JD program had been around at the time I went to law school, I probably would have done that. But I knew I wanted to do business and I knew I wanted to be in-house. I had worked in finance for 2 years in between getting my English literature degree, which is very related to finance, and going to law school. So I knew a little bit about what it was like to work at a company. And I met the general counsel at the company that I worked for before law school. I worked for Amdahl, and the general counsel there had done the JD MBA at Santa Clara and really convinced me that it was something that I should do. And I knew that I wanted to be solving problems and being proactive and working with business. So when I graduated from law school, I actually had a business development role for about a year and a half during the dot-com boom. And that was within Palm and then another startup that was related to Palm, if you remember the Palm Pilot, right?
Oh, I am old enough to remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah, dating ourselves here. And then the dot-com bust happened, and it was actually then that I took the bar exam. And luckily I passed the first time, and I found a job in-house with a former law school classmate. That's part of your network, right? It's your classmates at ARM. So I started out being a tech licensing attorney, just, dove deep into contracts. And then I actually had my own firm for about 9 years when my kids were really little, which was fun. I did all kinds of worked for many different startups and medium-sized companies. And then again, another friend from law school had joined PayPal, and she said, "You got to come over to PayPal." And I interviewed, and I decided to make the leap into this global company. I continued being a commercial counsel to start out with, but then I was tapped to work on the separation from eBay, of PayPal from eBay, which was like a big reverse M&A, which was super interesting. And that's where I kind of became interested in privacy. And then I held a bunch of other roles, including leading the product legal team and really kind of honing my skills in privacy. And then came to academia because I started to learn about plain language legal writing, which you and I have talked about, Olga, a lot, and visual design. And I thought law students need to hear this. So I reached out to Santa Clara, and that kind of started my journey there.
I love the richness of your career, and I love that you were reluctantly taking the bar exam. Your role out of law school was not at all law related, and it took a bust, a recession, to force you back into law. That's amazing. Let's dive in, because we had a number of conversations, and it is very clear that law firms, at least in media, seem to be embracing Gen AI. I talk to in-house department leaders all the time. They're very curious and learning quite a lot about it too. And how much would they implement is hard to tell, but they're definitely learning for many reasons, including because they have to support products that are developed internally. And then, of course, they're asking a second obvious question is, how can we operationalize ourselves using Gen AI? Law schools seem reluctant. Thoughts? What's going on? How can we make it better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors within law schools, right? But one of the things is that, legal education has a bit of a different aim, right? Or an additional aim than businesses, right? I mean, we are educating students not only to serve clients effectively and efficiently, but to get the basis of their legal knowledge. And we also have to prepare them to take the bar exam, right? Which you cannot use generative AI on, even though ChatGPT can pass the bar exam, right? So we are trying to teach lawyers to, these foundational skills, thinking like a lawyer, legal reasoning, being critical. And a lot of that does start with a blank page, not necessarily, sort of something that might help you with the first draft. That being said, Gen AI is in our law schools now. So we have within law schools, we have Westlaw Co-Counsel, we have Lexis AI Protege. I would say it's a little step in that direction. So it's coming, and we actually need law professors to be experimenting and knowing what the capabilities are and knowing what the limitations are, so that we can really work with our students who are using these tools today.
Let's talk a little bit about how I sort of glossed over what's happening in law firms and in-house. I'm especially interested in house. I know you come from in-house world and have a lot of conversations with in-house communities just like I do. What is your understanding of use of Gen AI in-house today? You mentioned some products of, you know, by Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis that are already embedded. Anything else? What else is going on? There's a lot of talk about it. What is actually done? What's going on in the wild?
Yeah. So, well, I have not done a full study about this, and I know others are really, trying to get their handle on it as well. What I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is more and more legal leaders um, are challenging their teams to use Gen AI. It's the question is, did you use AI for this? And if the answer is no, the next question is why not? Right? Because legal departments and companies are traditionally viewed as cost centers. I mean, we try to frame them as, and they're strategic, and we are saving the company money, right? But the bottom line is that we need to enable the business to close deals faster, turn around product advice faster, right? Be able to keep up with the huge accelerating speed of development and deal making. And so there is enormous opportunity for using AI to do that. And I think there's, contract management tools, e-discovery, knowledge management is an area that sometimes we don't hear about as much as the first two that I mentioned, but I think there's enormous capability to tap into an organization's own knowledge base that it has been keeping not only within legal, but maybe across the organization to get answers and get facts cross-functionally and to make better decisions as a result.
Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with in-house leaders, usually teaching them about how to transform intentionally, what it means, how to focus less on innovation, and how to embrace everyday step to make meaningful difference in your business. And as soon as I start talking about it, there's sort of two things come up: the ethics of it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then the education piece of it. And so I'm curious kind of what ethical issues and that you see come up in house and at a law school, and kind of what are the ways to overcome it, because we can't perpetually say, well, there are ethical issues. And by the
Right.
way, when people ask you, are you using AI, are you using Gen AI, I'm not always sure. Are they asking kind of, hey, have you used the tools available? Are you efficient? Or sometimes it actually comes from a more judgy place, like you didn't put
Yes.
enough work yourself, you did a shortcut. So that question is actually very loaded when people ask. My answer is usually like, what do you care if I use a Mac or PC? Do you like the product? Right. But I'm curious, let's talk about ethics, the ethics piece of it, because that does come up. And but also, including what's considered attorney work product.
Right. I mean, luckily we do have some guidance from the ABA and from the California State Bar and other state bars about how lawyers should think about ethical issues or existing ethical issues when using generative AI. And technology in the use of the legal practice is not new, right? To your point, it's, there was ethical guidance about using email, right? Back in the day, right? And we're all, of course, very used to that now. I think Gen AI has enormous differences from email, but basically the core of it, we're thinking about confidentiality, of course. We have ethical duties of confidentiality as lawyers. And so the tools that we're using, we need to make sure that we're not inputting client confidential information into. Some in-house teams have walled off versions so that they're not sharing that information back with the wider internet or whatever the model is that they're using. But and then competence, which I think is kind of around your question about attorney work product, right? Did you do this? What is really going on here? And how much do we care? And at the end of the day, a lawyer cannot outsource our duty of competence, right? We need to make sure that we are verifying what is coming out of the tools. We've all seen the embarrassing hallucinations that happen, and that's actually a feature of Gen AI, right? That's actually how it works. It will hallucinate. And So we need to verify, but we also need to look at, not only is it making stuff up, but is it misapplying things, or is it missing a nuance? Because as we know, many parts of the law are extremely nuanced, and sometimes some of the AI tools that are not trained on specific legal information are missing. They're kind of watering down concepts, and that's not necessarily what we need, but it still could be a good starting point. Could be great for using, getting more ideas, brainstorming, a quick edit of a topic sentence from a paragraph, something like that. And then there's other ethical issues, like because I run a clinic at the law school, I worry a lot about supervision of non-lawyers. That's a duty of mine. There's also just general compliance with laws, so knowing privacy and security limitations and following laws around, the courts. Courts have rules. So there's this candor to the tribunal. I love that word, not plain language, but we have to follow that. And then there's billing guidelines as well, in terms of how do we think about this from a billing perspective? How do we charge for it? Can we charge for it? What is our time starting to be worth?
Yeah, no, those are really good questions, and they very quickly become, all philosophical.
Yes.
What is time? What is it? What is time? I love that. You incorporated Gen AI in your courses. I'm curious how, and how is it working out?
Yeah, last spring, for the first time, I added an AI module to my Law and Technology of Silicon Valley class. And I also added, it used to be a final paper class. I added a presentation because you can't outsource that to AI, right? And I think it's great practice for students to give quick 5-minute presentations about something complex. And I also allowed them to use AI in, the production of their work. And it was really an experiment. I have guidelines around this, and the guidelines have evolved. My guidelines used to be disclose if you've used AI. That's pretty much it. It's gotten more nuanced. Now my guidelines are, if you use AI, you need to disclose, you need to turn in your inputs and outputs. You need to tell me why you used AI. And was it helpful? Not only did you verify what the output was, but let's look at this critically. Did it actually help you? And I would say that last spring in that class, I had some students using AI, and still a lot of people quite reluctant. This spring, it's pretty different. I think that I'm seeing a lot more sort of acceptance, maybe less, judginess about using AI, and really leaning into some of the experimentation. In my privacy law class, that's a little bit more of I had an exam at the end of the semester, right? And a lot of assignments throughout the semester. And I allowed the students pretty freely to use Gen AI with the guidelines I outlined, but no Gen AI on the exam. So that is really, you got to be able to know your stuff and write yourself on the exam, which I think was really helpful. It was interesting to see what it was good at in terms of the assignments. Like one of my assignments was to come up with a plan for implementing consumer rights requests under CCPA. That's not really like a very lawyerly thing to do, but it's absolutely something that privacy lawyers are doing. And that's a great thing that ChatGPT, can do pretty well. Get you started on a draft that then you can edit and make sure it's going to work for your organization without spending, 3 weeks on it, right? Other things like, what does HIPAA apply to, with this scenario? Missing a lot of nuance, I would say. So I expect that will get better. And finally, in the clinic class, this is where it's really important because it's real client work. I have different guidelines, which are no client confidential information into any Gen AI tools. And if you want to use Gen AI, let's work together. I supervise the students very closely. And so we might do some exercises in class with looking at how to find templates, using some of our trusted sources like Practical Law on Westlaw versus a blank page versus ChatGPT versus Google, and see what are the pros and cons of each of those sources.
So I'm really curious about the clinical piece of it. When you said you have various disclosures that you ask the students to do with respect to output, inputs, and quality of results, was that to you or to the client?
Yes. So it's to me, and this is something that I think this is a little bit of an evolving area. We do have, all clinics will have engagement letters or retainer letters, right? That we sign with clients, and you have to look at your own engagement letter to determine, what, if you need to disclose to the client your use of generative AI. Some clinics have incorporated a specific checkbox or even like an option for clients to say, yes, I agree with you doing that, or no. We don't have that type of provision in our engagement letter, but we certainly think about that. Do we need to tell the client, right? And I would say because of that, and because the students are really excited to get real skills and to put their skills in practice, they're actually not necessarily looking for the shortcut and to use Gen AI as much in the clinic. They really want drafting skills and to be able to learn. It's a real opportunity for them.
I have a few more questions. We're coming to the end, but I do have a few questions about sort of education and AI. Specifically, you know, for the last few years, we had this conversation. Do lawyers need to figure out how to code, or do they just need to talk to someone who does? I'm going to ask you a version of that question. Do lawyers need to become AI experts, or do they just need to be AI literate, or maybe some other version? Like, what is the nice to have or must have? How do you think about the skills? And I don't just think of students. I think all of us collectively will be reinventing ourselves many times throughout our career and need to be thinking about what is the level of proficiency we need to accomplish in order to be as effective or maybe even better at what we do every day.
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, I think in the EU AI Act, one of the provisions that has become effective already is around AI literacy. And I think that is something that, as a base level, we all need to be thinking about how to become AI literate. And that can mean a lot of different things. Right now, I'm spending a lot of time learning about nuanced AI technology concepts just because I'm interested in it. And I don't think that everybody has to do that, but I think we do need to at least understand, right? Like how do these common AI models work? How does a large language model work in terms of predicting the next word? We should have a pretty good understanding about that. And so educating yourself by playing around with it, I think, is a helpful thing to do. Even just, you always hear the advice, plan a trip, using ChatGPT or something personal that has nothing to do with your work. Or maybe this is one thing that I really like to recommend to lawyers and to law professors and to law students is put your LinkedIn about me or your faculty biography or whatever your short biography is into your favorite LLM tool and ask it to make it more readable, maybe a bit more friendly or approachable or interesting, and then check it, see what it makes up about you if it does. But generally, that's kind of a nice way to start. One of my favorite assignments, and I'm happy to share this with everybody, is a technology self-assessment that I give my clinic students at the beginning of the semester. And this is the first semester I've done this. Instead of preaching that to them about what they should and shouldn't do, I still do that a bit, of course, but I give them this technology self-assessment because I think your own self-reflection is going to be the best learning at the end of the day. And it's not just about generative AI, but it's about all kinds of other technology tools that I think students are starting to learn how to work with. So for instance, collaborating on a document, redlining a contract, right? How do we do these things? Do we know how to manage our email and set up a calendar invite? These are things that we have to do in the, it's not just, reading cases and giving performances in court, right? We actually have to be able to use technology. So I think it's helpful to know where you're starting from and what your goals are in terms of your learning.
I'd love to get the checklist or questionnaire. That sounds wonderful. I actually think it's even more than just all kinds of technologies, not just AI. I think it's first and foremost about reinvention mindset and
Yes.
being open to it. I have a very strong belief that we were born all to be natural reinventors and transformers. We were educated out of it. And I tell anyone who ever had a toddler knows that they didn't have to pay them bonuses to learn to walk. They kept falling and getting up and
Mhm.
persistently keeping going forward. To me, that's the best illustration that this ability to adapt and change and evolve is just something built in us. And somehow we think by the time we're super educated, become static.
Yeah.
And figuring out how you spend your time and how you learn and how you adjust and how you reallocate depending on all kinds of things. That's where I spend a lot of time when I talk to in-house professionals. And I find it's the same conversation we can have about blockchain, we can have about AI, we can have about all kinds of things. The steps are really the same. If you can remember the good old days of being a toddler who did not have to get bonuses to learn to walk and incorporate it into your life going forward, it's an absolutely great way to asking questions about technology. But where can folks find this questionnaire and maybe self assess? Because I do think that the part of self reflection of where we are today, where we want to be tomorrow, and asking the questions of who, and I deliberately say who is the most important question and then how. Lawyers tend to do the reverse of that. Where can we find that questionnaire?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't really published this, but I'm happy to do so. I've shared it just as a Google Doc with a few of the audiences that I've been kind of giving talks to recently about generative AI and in the legal profession and in law school clinics. So I'm happy to share that with anyone. You can follow me on LinkedIn and connect with me, and I will put up a post about the technology self-assessment, and people can comment there, and I'm happy to share it.
I love that. Maybe last question before our unavoidable goodbye. Well, how do you think the law education will evolve in the next, I was going to say 5 years, but 5 years seems like such a long, long time. I don't know, 2 to 5 years. And
Yeah.
then related to that, how can we encourage folks who are on the fence, who have all kinds of rightful reservations, including ethics? How can we encourage them to do more?
Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I think that law schools are rising to the challenge to meet students where they are, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty now for students that we need to help them with. And so I have no doubt that law schools are going to rise to the challenge. I know Santa Clara we're involved in a number of initiatives to, across the university to implement AI skills across different modalities and disciplines of teaching. And so stay tuned actually for some things there. But I think that, as you mentioned, right, when you sign up to be a lawyer, you sign up for a lifetime of learning, and especially so for law schools, we're all interested in equipping our students to do just that, a lifetime of learning. I think the next 5 years, I think you're right, that's like a really long time. I think 2 years, I think it's going to be drastically different, even though the traditionally law schools, and the legal profession as a whole has been slow to change. I think there's a forcing function here. This is just my own personal view, not, I'm not speaking on behalf of Santa Clara, but I think that it's a watershed moment. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see where things are in the next 2 years. And then just advice. I mean, I think that we need to start being more curious and less scared of this technology. So I really encourage people to start small and build from there, and just, like that toddler analogy, right? Just, you're going to fall down. You're the first time that you do something new, it might not turn out to be that great, and you might feel like just discarding it, but keep trying. There's all kinds of resources for learning prompting, and I'm happy to share a list of resources as well, just to get people started.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, please share the resources. That would be great. I just feel very validated. Every time I say 5 years is a long time, I feel like I have commitment issues. I don't think I have commitment issues. I think my commitment is just right at the pace of times. So I do think that 2-year timelines are great. And a great point about fear. That's actually quite a lot of things I end up training. One is around reinvention mindset, and two is about how to deal with fear. And it is actually a complex topic. We won't cover it today. Very important. Those are kind of fundamental things for you before you even start asking what tools are. And then definitely at some point ask the how question. I do recommend asking the how question at the very end. There are many more important questions and work you need to do before you ask the how question. Linsey, fantastic conversation. I love all the work you're doing and resources you're creating and that you're sharing. I encourage everyone to follow you. You are full of great insights and will not disappoint and will be very useful for folks who follow you. What is one takeaway you want people to take from this conversation?
One takeaway. Thank you so much. First of all, this has been a fabulous conversation. I always love talking to you, Olga. One takeaway is that lawyers and law students are using generative AI today, whether we want to admit it or not. It's happening. So get on board and we can learn together. The good news is that we're all learning together. Nobody who says they're an expert is really an expert.
There are no experts. And yes, we are learning together. Linsey, thank you so much. This was such a treat. And I heard you too. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.